Bruce Wheatcroft.
Yeah.
It is such an honor to see you today. We are at the Abbey for the Arts, a building that is 100 years old. It turns 100 years old today.
Not quite today.
Oh, I mean this year.
This year, June 13th.
June 13th. How long have you been with the Abbey?
We bought the facility in February of 2000. So we've been here just over 13 years now.
You have had a long career. You are a musician,
Yes.
an organ consultant, a theologian. You are also a choir conductor, a very well-known. You've done lots of recordings. Also a scholar, an academic. You've presented at highly scientific conferences.
Yes.
The most recent one was in San Diego
That's
at
right.
the Academy of Neuroscience for Architecture.
Yeah, it's a big mouthful, that one, but yes, that's correct.
I would like to go to the beginnings of Bruce Wheatcroft before he became the monumental personality you are today. You have done so much for the arts, for music. Let's go to the beginnings.
Sure.
How did you start getting into organ music?
When I was 4, I was sent off to a kindergarten in Calgary, where I was born and raised. My father was a piano technician, so he was self-employed, of very modest means, but he was very good at his craft. And the house, therefore, was always filled with musical instruments that he was tuning or restoring for resale, for good homes. And I was sent off as a young lad in my little Christopher Robin outfit with my little cap to kindergarten. And one day we had a show and tell, or I'm not sure that they called it that in those days, but it was, what can you do for the rest of the class? Show us what you can do. And I went to the piano and picked out a little tune for them. And one of the teachers phoned home and said, "How long has he been studying the piano?" And the response was, "He hasn't been. What did he do?" So when I came home, my parents had the conversation with me that maybe it was time to begin piano lessons. So I had my first few lessons with an aunt who was a school teacher and a fine player. And then I was sent to a teacher outside of the family, which was thought good counsel and advice on the part of those who said, don't have somebody in the family teach you. And I was very grateful for that in many ways. I had a wonderful teacher, a lady who I think saw some potential and worked with me until it was time to go on. I'll skip forward a number of years, 6 or 7 years. I did the usual Royal Conservatory exams and theory exams and that sort of thing. Also studied the violin for a period of 3 years. It was a rule of my father in the house that the children would study the piano for a minimum of 6 years and a second instrument concurrently for 3 of those years. And I think as a frustrated violin player, my father had me play the violin, which I did not enjoy very much at all. Nonetheless, I was an obedient child, and so I did my father's bidding. I also had what's called perfect pitch, where you can recognize a pitch and you don't have to see the instrument. It's like a color. And I think it's nothing more than long-term memory, but nonetheless, when he was tuning at home, I would play a note and say, "What's this?" And he would say C, but I was interested in the color rather than the name. But I associated the two, and I think that's where that came from. So I played the violin exam that was scheduled for me to do, and I played it relatively well in tune, which a young fiddle player rarely does. And so I won the silver medal for the highest mark in the province, and I wanted desperately to quit. And my father said, "All right, if you want to quit, you phone your teacher. You've just won the silver medal. You phone your teacher. You just won the silver medal. You phone your teacher." So I did, much to his surprise, and I quit. I was still playing the piano, and I said, what I really want to do is play the organ. Shortly thereafter, I changed to a very fine teacher who had just returned from Juilliard in New York. One of the students of Gladys McKelvey Egbert in Calgary, who produced some of the world's great pianists. Most of her students went on to Juilliard, so I was put in the hands of a very great teacher. And at one of my lessons, she said to me, her name was Alexandra Munn, head of the lateral lathe of the music department at the University of Alberta in Edmonton, where I knew her as a colleague. She said to me in a lesson, "What's wrong with you? You're playing dreadfully poorly today. What is it?" And I just blurted out, "I want to play the organ." I should back up and tell you that a number of years earlier, I was a chorister at our parish church, where we had a choir of boys, and a separate organist and choir director. And I had prepared a little piece of Bach. I was fascinated by the organ at church. I would go to church rather than Sunday school because I was captivated by the sounds of this instrument. And my father said, "Well, here's what you do. You prepare a little Bach piece and you make sure that it's memorized and that it's flawless. And then you go and ask the organist. Tell her it's prepared, it's been memorized, and that we thought you might be able to try it on the organ," which I did. And she slammed the lid of the organ closed. It was a lovely little pipe organ, and said, "No, nobody plays this organ but me." Naturally, I ran home pouring tears from the eye sockets and could not be consoled, and then didn't speak of it for another 5 or 6 years until this lesson with this wonderful piano teacher who said, "What's wrong with you?" And I blurted out after all these years, "I want to study the organ." So she said, "Where's your father?" I said, "Tuning somewhere." She found the number, told me to practice, and she would be back. When she returned, she said, "You'll have your first organ lesson next week. Now, for heaven's sake, play something decently for me." And so I went off to my first organ lesson, and it was a natural fit for me. The organ was an instrument that I sort of intuitively understood when I sat down at it. The colors, the stops that we use made sense to me. I understood how they could be combined with very little teaching and coaxing. And so within a few months I was appointed at the age of 12, the assistant organist of one of the big parish churches in Calgary, where I stayed until my undergraduate degree was completed. So that was how the organ came along, and it was clear at that time that the organ would be my chosen instrument. With that, of course, comes choral conducting, and all of the things that one expects will come with a career playing the organ.
Now I'm going to ask you, how did you get into theology? So at what age did you start to become interested in theology?
Very good question. I think the answer is over decades. When I was a child, I was fascinated by the experience of being in church, wondered what all of the symbolism and the pageantry was all about, what it meant, and understood it as a child understands it. As I grew up and spent my life in the church, which is where I worked, I was a musician and a church musician particularly, and so my work was in the church. I was very aware of the tension between clergy and musician. It's always been there historically for centuries. The musician feeling underrated or not consulted or that sort of thing. It's a natural tug between the two disciplines, theology and music. I had gone back to do a master's degree when I was in my 30s. I did an undergraduate degree in organ performance, a master's degree some 15 years later in musicology, so the history of music rather than performance. I tried to do it in a different discipline or a slightly different shift each time. And then at the age of, how old was I? 50, I guess. I decided that there was a tug. And the tug was, what can I do about this disparity between the clergy and the musician? And I wanted to go back to school. Life is lifelong learning for me. I believe in that very, very strongly. I'd been a school teacher as well as a musician in order to put daily bread and margarine on the table. And so I thought, I'm well established as a musician. I've had a national broadcasting career. I've been a choral conductor. I'm known in the city. I had a class of superb students. but it was still time for me to go back. So I went to St. Stephen's College in Edmonton on the campus of the University of Alberta, spoke to the head of the doctoral program, Dr. Bill Close, who said, no, you're in the wrong place. You want to go to the building across the street, which is the music department. And I said, no, I think I'm in the right place. Hear me out. And our 15-minute appointment extended to 2+ hours. He, as an absolute frantic fan, is the only word that comes to mind at the moment, for classical music, and particularly classical church music. Particularly the modern French composers, people like Messiaen, now gone, but of that school. And our conversation was, how can we get you into the theology department as a musician? So it was presented to his colleagues, and I sat for an interview and was taken in. And because of my life in the church, I was not required to do any makeup courses, which I was quite prepared to do, but they said, no, your experience in the church is sufficient. You've been there for 3 or 4 decades. You understand the workings of the church. You probably have heard the Bible from front to back countless times. You've listened to thousands of sermons. You've been engaged in dialogue with all of the mentors, the teachers, the people that you work with, the congregations that you have served. So come on into this program. We welcome you, but be warned, it will change your life. And it has. I began that program in 1993 at St. Stephen's College in Edmonton, and in 1995 I won the competition to come to Montreal and be the director of music at the Church of St. Andrew and St. Paul, one of Canada's large churches, one of Canada's very large organs, and second largest, I believe, in the country. So it required somebody who had good command of the instrument, and a semi-professional choir, producing concerts 3 or 4 times a year, often with orchestra, performances of the Messiah, again with orchestra, and national broadcasting for the CBC every Christmas. So there I was from 1995 until 2002, when a serious accident stopped me from moving forward in that career, and I had to shift. We were here at that point in time. My theological background, having just graduated in 2001, my accident followed by 2 weeks. So I became Dr. Wheatcroft and was without work 2 weeks later. So this was where we lived, and this was a wonderful, peaceful place. It was a retreat. It was a safe place. It was a place where I could come and heal, rethink, redirect, reinvent, redo, start again. And it was a good thing. It was a good thing. So while I have regrets that I can no longer play, I can still teach. And there are ways in which one can be creative, use the creative imagination, which is very much my strong interest now, not only in teaching as a pedagogue and in music, but in choral conducting, which I did a great deal of in my life, in preparing my students for examinations for university entrance and the like. I've been very fortunate to have an incredible number of gifted students. All of them tie into the theological component in one way or another, the musical component, musicologically speaking, and the performance aspect. So they're all tied together. 2 of my young assistants at the Church of St. Andrew and St. Paul have now gone on to finish their doctorates and have wonderful posts in the United States. So I'm very proud of the kids that I've raised as my musical children.
Did you find at any point that your career was somehow interfering with your personal life, or it was complementing it?
I would say it was interfering only in as much as it became a compliment. It was niggling away to say, you need to do something. There's some work here that you have to do. Find out what it is. Find out what it is. Scratch the surface and dig deeper. And I was very much encouraged by the school. I think they're known for that at St. Stephen's in Edmonton. Dig deeper, find out what it is that is tugging away at whatever it might be that you call it, the soul, the spirit, the life force. Some would name it God, some would name it any number of things.
As a conductor, what compositions did you like the most to work?
Whatever I was working on at the time, and I know that that's an answer which is very difficult to to deal with, but it's true. I would choose repertoire that I believed was right for the choir, right for the number of individuals I had, right for the size of the choir, right for the acoustic, and I'm particularly interested in acoustics. That was the dissertation topic for me, was reverberation characteristics in contrasting spaces. So the music that I chose would be music that could be done in what I call a dry acoustic or in a wet acoustic. That indeed was the reason that I went to speak at the Salk Institute last September, to address the neuroscientists who were interested to know my perspective as a musician on how the body, the brain, the spirit, the life force responds to different acoustical environments, so that they in turn could look at it in terms of the built environment, how they would look at building structures for today. Do we build for a particular musical period and style, or do we build for other concerns, light, for example? How do we put all of them together and make for a space which is, if nothing else, sheer magic? Concert halls are beginning to do this now, which is very exciting.
Just going to move. I'm trying to get a different perspective so people don't fall asleep. Yeah. I cannot put it like that because we have a note over there.
Right.
Okay. Just, yeah. You have been performing and conducting choirs for decades, and in several churches, buildings. You have a very good knowledge of what acoustics, reverberation, is. So, from your experience, being in so many places in Canada, which buildings, churches did you find having the best acoustics?
The generic answer to that question is a space which is in volume relatively large, music that is made from some height, that is to say a gallery at the back typically. The Roman Catholic Church really had it right originally when they built instruments in back galleries and put choirs at the back. I'm not sure that Vatican II did music in the Roman Catholic Church a great favor by moving it forward to the floor level where it became less effective. Having said that, hard surfaces, reflective surfaces that mix and blend the angle of the sound projection as it goes into the room, and from as high as possible, will create the best acoustical result. Now, finding those spaces, that becomes difficult. And again, I return to the concert hall scenario where we are seeing the shoebox design of European concert halls, particularly, that have been so successful for centuries, are being reviewed with great care, combing through why they work well. And it's because they have angles of reflection and refraction of sound. They are high, they're higher than they are wider typically. And for some intuitive reason we've understood, even if we didn't know what we were doing acoustically when building spaces, that these things worked. And so you see great cathedrals, the Gothic buildings and Romanesque buildings and so on, that are very, very high, narrow but high. And very often the organ, if it's on the side, again very high. Typically the best ones tend to be at the back. There are of course many exceptions. Concert halls like the Meyerson in Dallas, which I've had the good fortune to see and play the organ in, and attend a national convention of the American Guild of Organists with 2,000 church musicians all singing to a magnificent new instrument in a fabulous new concert hall. It's really quite an unbelievable experience. Acoustics at its best. We have a new concert hall in Montreal that I'm looking very forward to spending some time with. It sounds good to me at the moment. I hear the building, I hear the space when I go in, and I get a sense of how it might respond or might react. So all of this has to do with then, what do we do with the music that we make in these spaces? Do I go a little faster? Do I go a little slower? When I was making the recording for my dissertation, It was terribly frustrating to have an engineer saying, you must conduct at exactly this rate so that we have a fair comparison between the rooms. The rooms didn't want me to conduct at the same rate. They acoustically were telling me to change something. So that was tough. And that is tough when we go into spaces, but as musicians we need to hear the space that we're making music in. This room, even though it's a small concert space, we call it the great room in the house, it's often filled with furniture, artwork, but the walls are relatively high. It's almost a shoebox. You can almost hear a slight reverberation in the space. And when my students come, they say, "Ooh, it's very bright in here today," or, "Oh, the chairs are all out for a concert. The sound feels like it's being absorbed today." And this is what I want them to hear, so that they can adjust their tempos, their sense of musical shape, their sense of dynamic volume. Does it want to be bigger or less? All of those things are involved. So in terms of the church and what would be my favorite space, I can't answer, except to say there are countless, and each one has its own absolutely magical moment or magical component that makes it special in its own way.
What is the oldest organ that you played? Where is it?
The oldest organ that I've played is in Glen, Switzerland. It's an organ dating from the 14th century, so enormously old. Every year they have an early music festival of 6 to 8 concerts, I can't remember now. And in 1990 I was privileged to be invited as the Canadian representative to play. The Basilica of Notre-Dame de Valère is on the top of a mountain in Switzerland, in Glen. So you can drive partway up the mountain and then you walk the rest of the way up. The organ is a swallow's nest case, which means it's hanging off of the back wall. The building is rectangular. It does all of the things that look like it should be good. And the floor is the mountaintop, so solid stone. Very reflective with the uneven floor, which gives the sound a chance to blend and mix and so on. The organ was a magnificent sound. It's not all original anymore, as you might imagine, but some pieces are still the original. The keyboards are worn down from years and years, much like stone steps in a cathedral as you mount the staircase to the towers. We've all had that experience of the ground out stone from thousands upon thousands of footsteps over the centuries. The same is true of this keyboard, and I couldn't help but think when I was preparing for my concert, how many people have played this organ? How many composers have played on this organ? What music was developed here that people could hear? How did the organ develop out of the experience of building this particular instrument? The keyboard I played on, worn out as it was the new keyboard from the 17th century. So I was very moved by that experience and was challenged to play to my very, very best. I had a good day. I was very lucky. But of course they don't let you come down the mountain on concert days because they want you in good shape physically for your concert. So you're kept and you have lunch. The concert's at 3 in the afternoon. You have lunch with the curator sitting at a massive polished mahogany table with 3-foot walls. And you've ordered your lunch the day before, and after you've had your lunch, they put you to bed for a nap before your concert. Wake you, help you dress if you wish, and then it's concert time. So that was my experience playing on the oldest playable organ in the world. Magnificent experience.
What do you think of the churches that they make today? They're pretty much glass and steel. What about the acoustics in these places compared to the old churches, made of stone?
When I was speaking to the neuroscientist at the Salk, this came up in conversation. And I contacted one of the architects who's done the Cathedral of Christ the Light in Oakland, California. A wonderful instrument of colleagues from Quebec who built the organ for that space, a massive instrument. It's steel and glass. And the architect said to me about the magnificent acoustic, who knew? I can deal with light, I can deal with shape, but I can't deal with acoustic because I can't see it. I can't prove it. I can hear it, it moves me, but it's magical, it's there, and it's gone. As is music, unless it's recorded. But that's a bit of a cheat. If we listen to a recording, we know that we're hearing something that was once created, and only once. So it doesn't change, as a piece of music performed over and over again without being recorded will change. So in terms of spaces, we really don't understand. We understand a lot about how acoustics operate. We can plan for it, we can try, we can build, we can hope, we can do our very, very best, and then we just wait and see. We can project what light will do, we can project what the visual will be. We can't project what the sound and the acoustic of the space will be. We have to wait and hope that it has pleased whatever power that might be, and that we have a good result.
What is the future of the organ? Do you think it is extinct?
No. Schools are producing fewer and fewer organists, it's very true. Schools that once had 30, 40 people that's often studying organists, their major instrument or their minor study, are now down to 2 and 3. That's worrisome, because we've produced some of the world's greatest players today. In 2013, we have some of the best that has ever been on the planet. But I don't think it's going to go, because we see people who come into our studios, our teaching spaces, our homes where we make music, and we see the students that are inspired by the sound of something other than the piano, for example. In this house we have harpsichords and a little pipe organ and the modern grand piano, the square grand piano from the 1800s, early 1800s, on which the children can all listen and experiment with their pieces of music. When I see the sparkle in the eye, I think that, here we go, there's somebody who's interested in the harpsichord or somebody who's interested in the organ. And so I'm able to foster that interest and see, explore it a bit and see. Or they'll just say, I want to try this, may I try this, this intrigues me. And you know very quickly if they're going to be naturals or not.
You told me that in this house you have such instruments.
Yes.
Do you think I could see one?
Of course.
Oh, thank you. I will follow you.
Okay.